2:30.
Daily Rambam for Tuesday, Beis Cheshvan Tavshin Pei Aleph, the second Perek Sheni of Hilchos Mila. So we are continuing today on the subject of Mila, of course, after we dealt yesterday with the obligation, the etzem chiyuv to have a Mila, who the chiyuv is incumbent on, when does the chiyuv kick in, what time the Mila should take place, by day and not by night. We learned about whether Mila pushes off Shabbos and Yom Tov. We learned about Chayla, and now in this parak that we're beginning now, so in the first section of the parak, we're going to deal more with the actual blood and gore, the actual act of the Mila. And in the second section of the parak, we're going to go through the details of how to actually pull off Mila on a Shabbos, when it falls out on Shabbos, and you're being Deicha Shabbos, how to do it, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. So we begin the Perek with the male himself. Perek Sheni Aleph, Akel Kshed and Lamol, every Yid is kosher to perform Bris Mila Va'afilu, and that includes even Ha'arel, a Jew who doesn't have a bris himself for whatever reason, the Eved, the Isha, the Cotton, those three that always come in tandem, the Nashim of the Muktanim. Molim b'makim she'ein ish. So if there's no moil available, they can stand in, they could perform the Mila. Aval goy lo yomul klal. However, a goy, someone who's not Jewish at all, should not. The imol, the Rambam says, but if he did, pay attention, the Rambam says, einay tarich lachzer u'lemulei shniya. There is no need. You don't have to do them again. We're going to talk about it in a second. Okay, so we'll pause here because the rest of the halach is about the implement. So the Kesef Mishnah Shtelzich on the Sakel Kshed and Lamol, he says it talks about this in Gemara Menachos and Gemara V'Edazara, and extracts a passage that says Minayin Lamila. How do we know that a guy that does Mila, it's possible? So there's two psukim. Daughter Bar Papa, we know him mainly from the Siyum, but there is Daughter Bar Papa. He said in the name of Rav that there's a pasuk Va'atas Brisi Tishmar, so only people who are involved in the bris can perform the bris. And the Bechanan said Himel Yimel. Darshan said Hamol Yimel. Someone who has a bris, he can do a bris for someone else.
Is that the case that woman can't do it?
1 second. So Gemara says my binayu. Ikku benayu isha. The nafkamina between the two psukim is an isha. If it's va'atas brisi sishmer, and if that's the pasuk, then the isha is out of the she's out of the running because she's not a bas mila. However, if it's himel yimer hamor yimel, then a woman would be allowed to, because the famous line, the itza command to mehila damya. So she's not a bas mila, but she's command to mehila.
Someone who has a Mila can give.
Yeah. So that's that Gemara. So the Gemara, both according to both psukim, a guy can't, but according to one, a woman could. It quotes the Rif in
you're not allowed to hire him as a shliach.
Can't be the moil.
He has to be chayav
Because it's shliach of the kamoisa. So it's the yid that does it. I'm doing the Mila.
I mean, there's definitely more room to figure out exactly what's the gather of the moil and what would be the problem. And we're going to say in a moment, according to those, we're saying that Rambam says that ain't tzarich lachzor lemulei. So it sounds like ultimately, so is it kosher? Is it puzzle? If it's kosher, why? If it's puzzle, why? There's definitely more to discuss. We're just going to mention a few points. The Rif in Masechah Shabbos, apparently, which is where he goes into the details of Mila. So in Masechah Shabbos, he brings this halacha in. He says, Hilchos, heicha deleka gavri Yehuda, the yad al mimhal. Where if you have a Jew, you don't have a moil, and you have itza Yehudisa, a Jewish woman who knows umala shaper dami the halacha Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk himel yimel itza dami. That's why the Rif goes on the record there and says that we go with Rabbi Yochanan. The Kesef Mishnah also mentions that. There's a Havamina that may be an Arvi Mohol. You have Arvim that have a Mila. So maybe if he's a Mohol, so does that mean that he's in the running, that he's in the gather of Mila? No, it doesn't change anything whether he's Mohol or not. Although interestingly, there's the famous shita of the Rambam that B'nai Keturah were Chayav and Mila, and that's a whole interesting discussion on its own. Totally different place in Rambam.
The Torah says explicitly that Yishmael had a Mila by
Right.
13 years old.
Right. So there might be, according to the Rambam, there might be a Chiyav Adayim Azeh for the Bnei Yishmael. We don't, Bnei Yishmael, I think, according to the Rambam, are not. Bnei Keturah, yes, but they're all intermingled. We don't know who's Yishmael, who's Keturah, so they're all Chayav. So he's sort of supporting their practice of performing Mila. Right. Right. Anyway, but Lagabi this, Arvi Mo, Pasul Lomo, Yisrael Oral, Kosher Lomo. So a guy with a bris doesn't change anything, and a guy without a bris is still kosher. And the Kesef Mishnah says, when the Ram says that everyone else, the Isha, everyone else, they're all, because they're all chayiv in the mitzvah, even the woman, they all have a shaykhs to mitzvah, so they're in the running, they have a relevance to this mitzvah. And the line in the Rambam, Makim Shein Ish, is source to the Rif. The Gemara doesn't have this line of Makim Shein, that comes from the Rif. The Rambam, in this case, took the Rif's language and implemented it over here. I'll mention about a mummer in a second. Now, but again, guy, even though we quoted the Gemara that made it sound so simple, that Mila Ba'akum, Mila B'Goy, V'Nachri is Psula, but it's actually not so posh. If you look at the Gemara Menachos, the wider context was that a guy, Mila B'Goy is Kshera. Then the Gemara quoted this Memra that it's Psula. So the Kesef Mishnah gets into working out the sugya. We're not getting into that. Just pointing out that even the background in the Gemara is not so simple. If you look at Shulchan Aruch, what does it say Shulchan Aruch? So in Shulchan Aruch here today is Siman Reish Samach Dalet Sif Aleph, which is the middle of Hilchos Mila. So it says there, the Mechaber writes, a guy, even if he's moho lo yimo klal, the immo ein tzarich lachzor lamo pam shenis. So he goes with the Rambam. Hagah, the Ramah interjects and says, v'yesh emim techayovim lachzor. So that's where we have, we all have the impression, the general impression that you have to do a toughest dam bris. That's coming from the Ramah via the Torah and the Smag. What's the market? You look at the Torah, the Torah says, Kosav Rambam in Tzarech. The Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Smag, Kosav that you have to go again. So the Beis Yosef says, when the Ram says in Tzarech, so Rabbeinu Menayach said the reason is the Lei Matzina B'Torah Mila L'Shma. So what we had by Sefer Torah, we had by guy doesn't have l'shma. So if that's the big problem, if the guy can't do a l'shma, so it's not really a ma'isa hamitzvah. He didn't do. Who says you need l'shma by Mila? Where does it say? So that's how he phrases it to explain why you wouldn't have to go and do it a second time. Now, when the Torah quotes the Smag as saying that the Rambam said this, the Smag said that. The Beis Yosef says, by the way, who says the Smag and the Rambam disagree? He said, in the Smag itself, it said, so the Rambam said one statement, the Smag copied the Rambam, and then he added, so maybe the Rambam agrees. He says, maybe the Rambam also would have agreed that ein tzarech lachzor v'lachtech, two different things, cutting and pricking, two different actions. So the Rambam said you don't have to cut, but maybe the Rambam would agree that there's no better than a cotton shenoilad kshumal. Cotton and kshumal, the Rambam said you have to be toughest number. So why would a child who got a Mila from it's like the Mila came on its own. There was no mitzvah, there was no Maisa Mila, Maisa mitzvah that gave the child a bris. So it's like being born with a bris. So Mr. and the Rambam could agree that. So it could be everyone's in agreement here, and the Rambam is not disagreeing. Now, while we're at it, so let's note a few more halachas that the Ramah adds. But again, the Moil, because this is all that Rambam has to say about the Moil, and that's it. So first of all, a mummer is a meshumit. So if he's a meshumit for the whole Torah, or if he's a meshumit just for Arlos, so he has the din of a guy. What if there's a child that for some reason he has an emergency medical situation, he needs to have a Mila within the first 8 days? Let's say that you have a scenario like that. The Rashba says that the Ramah is quoting that at that point there's no difference between a Yid and a Goy. It's not ideal and better to have a Yid do the circumcision if you're doing it before 8 days, because before 8 days it's mamish, not a mitzvah, it's not a Mila, it's nothing. So you can have a guy do it, no difference.
So you have to do a toughest time afterwards.
And then if you have tzitzin and makvan al which we're going to learn about in this Perek, if there's something that actually, actually you didn't do a full bris, or you didn't do the priya, so then you should wait till the 8th day, or whenever he recovers from that, and then a Yisrael should do it. That would be good. And here the Ramah, everyone knows you have a bris, you look for a moil, lachzir lahadar achar moil bal bris hayeser toiv etzadik. You have by the Rabbi the discussion of a mumche versus a Yirei Shamayim. The mumche always weighs out, but if you can get a Yirei Shamayim, a tzaddik, so the Ramah mentions that as well. Now in the Rambam here, then there's the whole discussion of what if you're mechabit someone, you said you're going to be the moil, and then you want to change your mind. So you can change your mind. Asr lachzir by. You're not allowed to change your mind if you said that. However, im chazar by have chazara, and there's no kinyan. A kinyan, you can't make a kinyan on you're going to be the moil. However, if he swore, then you do force him. Apparently, there was kept coming up in the Middle Ages. People were promising, and the Rishonim talked about kinyan not nishbayeh. What if you tell someone that you'll be the moil, and then he's not in town, so we gave it to someone else. Then it turns out that the original guy is in town. Okay, and the woman, by the way, she can't make her own decision of who should be the moil because she's not shaykh to the mitzvah, so she doesn't have jurisdiction. She doesn't have a say. Yeah.
We just said before that a woman's allowed to do it.
Right. She can do the. We're talking about yesterday in Perek. We learned about the father has the chiyuv until the child becomes an adult. The father has the chiyuv. So since it's his chiyuv to give the child the bris,
choose this moil over that moil.
Yeah, ideally, he should be doing himself. If he's not doing it himself, he should choose the moil. The woman can't mix in and change things around here.
Even after mitzvah, he has to feel
If there's no father, so there's no chiyuv on the man.
Till when he becomes an adult, first the father, then based in, then when he grows up himself. So that's that part of the halacha. Now let's move on to the implementable koil moilin. You can use anything to do the circumcision, to perform the afilu b'tzor, a rock, ub'schuchas, glass, ub'chol davar shekaydes, anything that cuts. The lo yomu b'krumis shalkan. However, you have a reed, a bamboo stick, something like that. You shaved it off a little bit or something. You made it sharp. Don't use that because apparently it has some bad results. However, ideally you should use metal, bein besakin, bein misparayim, whether it's a knife with one side or a double, scissors which has two blades. But no kol yisrael besakin. The minute the Rambam says is to use a knife. Now this also leads us to a whole discussion with the clamps. You have a big discussion in the last 100 years about the clamps. So let's talk about it a little bit. Tzitz Eliezer, one of the Paiskim, passed away a few years ago. So he describes there's the Muggin clamp. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but there's a few clamps. That's the most famous one. So he describes how does the clamp work. So the clamp first it clamps the spot that where you want to remove it, and it clamps it so hard that the child turns colors. It's a very powerful grip, and the problem is that it's such a powerful grip that it kills off the flesh. It severs without actually making a full cut. It severs it kills it. And part of what it does is because it kills also it squeezes the nerves. There's no blood comes out. The orla and what's under the orla, what you do the priya on, comes off in one shot. There's no mitzitza because there's no blood.
I've been to bris like that, and I could see why secular Jews are anti-bris. The child is not suffering.
So that one actually has more tsar. Yes, the Paiskim mentioned the clamp has more tsar for the child.
Like that. Would you use the
clamp? Yeah. So some of the Paiskim actually mentioned that just for the tsar alone. But when the Tzitz Eliezer, so someone wrote the description to him, and he said, "I got my own version. I checked it out myself. I confirmed everything you said is exactly true." And there's so many problems with it. Number one. You're not actually doing Mila with a knife. The clamp already severed it's like a piece of bus or mace. It's not actually really attached to the person in a proper way. It would, if you left it there, it would just shrivel and then fall off after a few days. So that means that the knife isn't doing, meaning first you clamp, then you cut. There is a knife, but the knife isn't doing anything. The knife isn't doing the removal. It's just for show. It's just cosmetic. Actually do the bris with a knife. Number two, you're not doing priya properly. Priya is supposed to be with the nails. Number three, the priya is supposed to come after the arla. Here it's together, grips it both at the same time. Number four, part of Mila is Hitzah's bris, Hitzah's down bris, and here there's no blood. And we know that toughest down bris, the whole significance of a toughest down bris is that's at least something. At least you're doing something of the Mila. So you're lacking this important part of the meal. Where's the dam? Also, never mind, we speak about the dam bris. It's so much part of the language of the Mila. Also, there's no mitzitza. Mitzitza, being mitzitza dam. There is no dam to do mitzitza. And Maram Shik says that if you're not going to do mitzitza at all, better not to do a bris. If you're not going to do anything at all. We're going to get into the mitzitza controversy in a bit. Number 6, all the brachas are brachas levatala, because you're supposed to make the what does the moil do? First he clamps, then he makes the bracha, then he cuts. But the cutting, we said, is not real cutting. So that means he did the brachas after the deeds. The bracha is supposed to be before the deed. Also, the tsar hatinik, much greater pain for the child. According to some doctors, could even harm the child. If you did it on Shabbos, you'd be chayvel. You're making a wound, an unnecessary wound. He says we have to wake everyone up, alert. This is a complete scam. It's not a real Mila. Many other places, Moshe Feinstein talk about it. That's we'll leave it at that.
So, good question. If you remove the clamp, what would happen?
It would fall off after a few days. It's
It would
completely
literally fall off there.
yeah.
So,
That's here.
It's
But
completely.
if you leave the clamp there long enough for the circulation of blood not to go in. But if you put it on right away and take it off right away, the
Yeah,
circulation.
right.
I don't know
It's like
whatever
the
clamping
logo,
they do.
like the logo.
It's a very strong clamp, it looks like.
Right.
Yeah, apparently. And it's very painful. But by the time they cut it, the child isn't crying anymore because it's all over by then. Halacha beis.
Do people use it?
No.
And none of
No, not orthodox. Yeah. Halacha beis. Ketzad moilin. What do you actually do? So it's a little graphic. So you cut all the skin that's covering the crown until you uncover the crown. Then comes priya. So there's another layer under that, so that you pull open with your nails. And you push it this way and that way, until you can see the actual flesh of the crown, the atara, and that's the Mila. Then there's the mitzitza, the suction, until you suck the blood even from distant areas, because otherwise if you don't do it, this is sakana. That's the reason given for mitzitza. If there's a moil who's not doing the mitzitza, then you fire him. And after you do the mitzitza, nice and Allah is spelonis or yatia, different kinds of bandages. Now this brings us to the controversy of mitzitza b'peh. A few years ago in New York, of course, was the epicenter of the controversy, and it's been going on for since the 1830s. The question nowadays is if you can use a tube. Now in the 1830s, the tube wasn't invented yet. The question was whether you could use some kind of sponge. The sponge will absorb the blood or whatever. So in 1837, there was a Rav, the Yad Eliezer. He was a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer in Hungary. He sent a Shaila to his Rabbi. There was a number of children that got a Mila by a certain moil, all caught a certain disease. And the local doctor determined that he's transmitting a disease from his mouth. So the doctor said that if you just use a sponge, you'll get the same benefits and without the drawbacks, without the diseases. So the Chassam Sofer, surprisingly, that's what makes it extra controversial today. The Chassam Sofer said, great idea. This is the Yofa Kasav. The whole idea of Mitzitza B'Peh is just the Mekubalim who insist on it. They say that in order to be mamatik the din, there's dinim here, there's gevura, to be mamatik the din, the parents, the Fasayim, or mamatik the din, whatever. It says Eilan or Asik ben Astaris, which is a line the Chassam Sofer pulls a lot when he wants to. Especially there's a sakana. And all we need to do is get the blood out, whatever means necessary, whatever means available. We can believe the mumchim. Now we're trusting the mumchim here. How do we know that the sponge is actually accomplishing what the Chazal wanted us to accomplish? So we can trust the doctors on this. And he says anyway. The other things in the Gemara that it talks about kamoin and espelonis from mishum sakana. So whatever it takes to do mishum. Is anyone kamoin and espelonis? Does anyone do kamoin now? I was going to mention kamoin later. Kamoin is cumin. Does anyone apply cumin to the everything Chazal say mishum sakana has to be taken literally? As long as you're pretty safe to say that the child's okay.
Back then, it could have been used as an antibacterial. I don't think that a lot of spices
Right.
originally were medicinal.
Right. You're saying nowadays we would understand.
We
We'd
don't
have a greater
understand.
appreciation for the kamoin than the Chassam Sofer seemed to have for it. He's saying we don't even do it.
Well, I'm saying
Right. Also, we don't use the exact same ispelonis, whatever bandage Chazal. We don't find out what ispelonis that Chazal have to do the ispelonis exactly. So the same thing for mitzitza. Even if it said clearly in the Mishnah mitzitza, but it doesn't. Apparently the Mishnah just says mitzitza. But even if it said mitzitza in the Mishnah, we could always switch it out for something else. But you should make sure that the doctors are being honest, that it has the same effect. And so according to the Chassam Sofer, you don't need mitzitza b'peh. Happens to be that it wasn't printed in the Shas Shuvas Chassam Sofer. It was only printed in the Yad Eliezer. So those who were looking to cast aspersions always had a bit of a way out. Although there's no real serious doubt that it's an authentic, legitimate tshuva of the Chassam Sofer. Already, the Aruch Lener, who lived in Germany, Yaakov Ettlinger, already, among others, was pushing back against the Chassam Sofer and said, the Chassam Sofer isn't alive anymore, and it's not so respectful to respond to him. You can't really respond to him. But if he was still alive, I would approach him and I would say, what are you talking about? Mitzitza always means suction. The specific solution that Chassam Sofer was saying was okay, it was a sponge. The sponge doesn't have any suction. It's absorbing, it's not sucking. So show me one place in Shas and Torah where mitzitza doesn't have the connotation of suction. So if you don't have Mashiach, you don't have that Mashiach b'koyach, you can't say you're replacing mitzitza b'peh.
The kid dying. The other person couldn't see that.
I don't know if the children were dying. I don't know what they have to see what disease it was and how bad the disease. Obviously, if the mile is causing people to die, you can't just continue.
But shouldn't there? It seems from the Rambam that the whole mitzitza b'chlal is for just physical reasons.
Right. So that's so yeah. On the one hand, it's just a physical thing. So can we just replace it with something else? On the other hand, if Chazal said to do it a certain way, let's say here there's only a sponge, there's no suction, so the Aruch Haner was saying we're not actually replacing what Chazal said from Shum Sakana. You need suction. If you don't have suction, it's not good. Then in 1887, someone came along because of this and invented the tube. And ever since then, that muddied the subject even more because you're more or less doing the same thing. Well, why do you need the pad afka? But so today, you really have a big split. The modern Orthodox, people like that, are okay with the tube. And you have their poskim are willing to say that a tube is okay. If you're more Haredi, then you say, no, it's a pad afka. And that's the story in short. Halacha Gimel. Tzitzin ha'ma'akvin. Yesh tzitzin ha'ma'akvin es Mila, v'yesh tzitzin she'em ma'akvin. And when the whole thing is said and done, now you look and there's still something that's covering the area. So some are ma'akvin and some are not. Ketzad. How do you determine him? If it's so long that it's covering the height of the atara, most of the height of the atara, is still an aro. That's something that you need to take care of. And if it's only a little bit, it's not covering the full atara or the rave. That's not ma'akiv. Now this also has a controversy. The question is, according to the Rambam, it sounds like you should really be cutting everything off until you reach the bottom of the atara. However, in reality, you don't actually have to do that. You can cut a little bit and just pull, and you pull and you set it sets into place, and then it's not covering the atara anymore. So the question is, how much do you actually have to cut? So the Chachmas Adam, the Chai Adam, so he has the Chachmas Adam, the Binas Adam, and the Chachmas Adam, he criticizes the Moelim that aren't cutting enough. He says you have to check a few days later, you have to have a checkup to see if the Mila was done properly, if enough was cut. Although in his Ha'aretz, in Binas Adam, he's made that the Taz and the Shach seem to say that if the Moel didn't cut enough, you don't have to go back and cut. As long as you did the Priya properly, as long as the Atara is revealed. That seems to fit more with the Rambam, because the Rambam talks about cutting. However, it's actually a Tzemach Tzedek here in the mix. The Tzemach Tzedek has a tshuva that relates to this topic, where agrees that there has to be a cutting. You can't do it without cutting at all. Like if you were just able to somehow use your fingers to completely get it all out of the way, it has to be cutting. However, so that's in that sense, Chachmas Adam is right, but lav dafka, it all has to be removed by way of cutting. There's the Divrei Chaim. The Divrei Chaim is the one who's known especially for pushing back against the Chachmas Adam. He said, whoever listens to the Chachmas Adam is terrible. You shouldn't cut so close. It's dangerous. So if you follow the Chachmas Adam, you're a danger to society, and you have to not go too close, and the rest you just you do manually. So that's that story. Halacha Daled. Halacha Daled Hamol Kozman Shoesek Mila. While you're still involved in the process, Chayzer Bein Al Tzitzin. Ma'akvin bein al tzitzin shem ma'akvin. So you can still keep cutting, whether it's ma'akav or not. You still keep cutting if you see that there's something still to cut. Perish, once you finished, al tzitzin and ma'akvin chayzer. So if it's mamish, like you said in the last halacha, he's still an aral, so then you have to go back and do it again. But tzitzin shem ma'akvin ain't a chayzer. But if it's not ma'akav, it's not covering the roiv, then don't start cutting again. Mobile paras amila kilimo. But if you didn't mila without the priya, without the under the but under it, you have to go back. It's not a bris milah. Halacha hey, kat mishapsari rachem aduldol eshoya bal basar ad sheira kilein imol. If something about the child's anatomy, it somehow looks like afterwards creates the appearance that there's no bris. So really nice you don't look at it. You have to see when it's fully aroused. Then you know whether he's an aral or not. If then it looks fine and it's out of klum. We're talking about some economy. If you can fix something for appearance sake, fix it, but you don't need anything.
Is the use of anesthetics discussed?
So I
Dentist book there. Let's say when you do,
right. So there's something from the Rabbi about this in the Kutei Sichos. I didn't look it up again before, but I remember this came up in the past. The Rabbi says that the tsar hamila is an integral part of the mila. It's meant part of the bris is that you're giving yourself some pain, and that's part of the krisas bris. If you don't have the pain, it's not a proper right. So ideally, you do not use.
Follows that, for example, after surgery, during surgery people don't feel anything, but afterwards there's a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm.
Does that count?
No, apparently it has to be the actual act. Should be a painful act.
Trying to help guys out.
Right. I think I remember hearing something that the doctors say that a child of that age, anesthetic might not be safe at that age anyway. I think even the doctors in the hospitals do not use anesthetic when they do circumcision themselves. Even if it's painful, it's not even recommended.
For an adult, it's dangerous.
Also true.
Now, when I talk about that type of anesthetic, the injection type, this one you can smear.
Mm-hmm.
It's a topical. It puts
Local.
What happens if you have
What'd you say about the adult?
Nothing. It's still a mitzvah, but it's like an extra halachic thing. So however, even when there's kishoy, it still doesn't look like there's a bris. So that's the test. So then it's not. Then it wasn't good. You have to cut until it is revealed during kishoy. That was no different. That's however However, according to Torah, if it looks like an oral later, but if you did the mila properly, you don't have to. It's not like an outcome, like the entire life that the person has to look like a mohol. That's not the minat Torah. If you have any further practical questions, you can always schedule an appointment with an expert. Right? Okay. Halacha vav. Aisin called tzarchei mila b'Shabbos. Now moving on to how do you actually do a bris on Shabbos. So you do anything that's relevant to the mila itself. Moilin, upayrin, umeitzitzin. Do the mila priya mitzitza. V'chayzer atzitzin ma'akvan alfa b'shaperash. And if it's ma'akvan, you can even once you're finished, you can go back and start cutting again. V'altzitzin she'ena ma'akvan calls man shalei peresh. You can even cut the things that are ma'akvan as long as you're still in the middle of the act. But nice and Allah is polanis, you can put the bandage on. However, all the acts that are preparations, that has to be done before Shabbos. You can't do it on Shabbos. So, for example, they didn't find the knife. You can't start making a knife on Shabbos. Start taking out your sharpening your rock and start sharpening a knife. Can't do that. You can't do it. You can't carry it. Even if it's just a matter of it's not a rishus harab, you just need to make an eruv. If there's no eruv, you can't carry it. And even eruv the Rabbanan is not overridden by the need to bring the knife. Whatever you can do in Erev Shabbos must be done then. We don't give you a second chance on Shabbos. Halacha Zayin. And you can't start grinding whatever it is, the spices, the herbs, that have medicinal, that are helpful. You can't start boiling water. Allah probably just means the Mila itself. We're referring to the Lashon Nekeva. You don't make the bandage for the Mila. You don't start mixing wine and oil, which is something they used to do. Then apply it to the wound. Here's where the kamen gets mentioned by the Rambam, which is cumin. If you didn't grind that Erev Shabbos, that now happens to be something you can just do with your teeth. That you could do. And with wine and oil, so you can't mix it, but you apply it's like take a bite of bread and take a bite of butter. So you put the wine and the oil and zaklal, and the rule is in one line called Shabbos. If you could have done it earlier, you can't do it now. So what happens if you forgot? It actually gets pushed off. You forfeit the mitzvah of Bismana. Ches.
It's strange because the mitzvah itself is technically Hilchos Shabbos,
Right.
so you're allowed to do it, but if you can't do it because of the Hashim mitzvah,
Yeah. It's like taking a car to do the Mila on Shabbos. These are extra things. Only the mitzvah itself is Hilchos Shabbos, not the extra things. Malu es hakotin b'Shabbos. If you did the Mila, you had prepared the hot water and the salmon, but then it spilled. Now you do everything. What's the sakana? The previous halacha, when it said you don't do it, what he meant was don't do the Mila. If you don't have samanim and you don't have the hot water, then you won't be able to do the Mila, even for that reason alone. You can't do the Mila first and then say, now it's a sakana. However, if you had the right to do the Mila because you had the water and the salmon, and then it spilled, then it's a sakana. All of a sudden, you gotta do it. It's pikuach nefesh. The places where the practice was, the part of the healing the child was to wash the child. So you could do it on Shabbos, the day of the Mila, whether it's before, whether it's after, or if it's the 3 days after the Mila, which falls on Shabbos, whether it's the whole body, whether it's just the spot, the location, that spot alone, whether it's before Shabbos, whether it's on Shabbos, now the Ravid says that if you're mentioning before the Mila, then only a guy can heat up that water. How can you be mechamen water on Shabbos before the Mila? Before the Mila, nothing happened yet. Only a guy could do it. And there's all Shraga V'Tarya. The Rambam was asked about it. We're not going to get into it. I also want to point out that this halach is mentioned in the Sichos Chelek Hey, Parshas Vayera, also coming up pretty soon. Rabbi asked over there, why didn't Hashem visit Avram on the second day? Bikur Chaylim. If Hashem does the mitzvah of Bikur Chaylim, Avram was sick on the first day. Hashem was involved, so that could have been Bikur Chaylim itself or whatever. But the third day Hashem came. What about the second day? So the Rebbe says the Mizrahi, one of the main commentaries on Rashi says that later on, the Ran says that on the second day there's no sakana. So there's no sakana, there's no Bikur Chaylim. And however, there it says Shekenu Dasarif Rambam, because the Rambam over here says that you can be Mechal Shabbos on the day of the Mila, you can be Mechal Shabbos on the third day. It doesn't think we Mechal Shabbos on the second day. If you can't be Mechal Shabbos, that means there's no sakana. So you see clearly in the Rambam, there's no sakana on the second day. The pile the Rebbe does, that's right. That's in Sif Aleph or Sif Beis. The Rebbe doesn't accept that teretz. First of all, there are other shittas that say the second day is also sakana. The Rambam, others say even more masukan. And also according to the Ran, it's still a chayil she'em by sakana. You could still be a chayil for a chayil she'em by sakana. Who cares if there's a sakana or not? And ultimately, the Rebbe has a whole teretz that if Hashem would come on the first or second day, then there would be a refuah then and there, and the refuah would not be al pitava. Al pitava, you can start healing on the third day. And Hashem wanted that the whole mitzvah should be done al pitava, because the whole idea of the mitzvah of Mila was to have a hashpah and tachtainim and the velt. So you don't want to mix nisim and Hashem wanted it to be. That's how the Rebbe answers it over there. But just interesting connection to this halacha. Now to finish off. Now we said you can't bring a knife in Erev Shabbos. So now Ram comes back then and says halacha test shak v'leiviu sakam Erev Shabbos. If you forgot and didn't bring a knife in Erev Shabbos, ayman l'goy lo havi sakam Shabbos. You could tell a goy to bring it. But not if it's through Rosh Hashanah. He's bringing it through a place without an Erev. Klal shel davar. What's the rule? Kol davar shas yaseh b'Shabbos asur aleinu mishum shvus. Mutulan aleim legoy lasis oisik. They lasis mitzvah zman or shvus l'tzorech mitzvah, as it's commonly known. you're allowed to tell a guy to do a drabanon for a mitzvah directly. And if it's mamish and malacha, not a shvus, then also on the lema legoy, that's why the guy can't carry it through the Rishus Haram. Allah Yud, Machshire Mila, Afilu Bezmana, Einon Doichen as Yomtiv. It's not like, oh, Yomtiv, you can do all kinds of malachas, so surely you could do all those things on Yomtiv. No, it's not Doichen Yomtiv either. The same rule actually applies to Yomtiv for everything, even the things you're allowed to do. If you can do it on Erev Yomtiv, you can't do it on Yomtiv. Kal v'chaymer advarim, and it's a kal v'chaymer. Mloi dochu Machshire Mila, Shvos Shu Medivreim. It can't even be Deicha Shvos. Guy could do the Shvos, but you yourself can't do the Shvos. You can't do the Derabanan. Heyach Yidchu Leisasa Shal Teira. So all of a sudden there'll be the Deicha Leisasa of Yom Tov. However, there is a difference on Yom Tov. However, you can even lechatchila come and start grinding the samanim on Yom Tov because because it's edible. So you can say, I did it in the kitchen. Oh, I'm going to use it for the bris milah.
The fact that you have to cook on Yom Tov.
So things like that involve
that extends itself.
things that are edible, the parts, the malachas that are edible, that you can do.
Yes, the cumin you could.
Well, cumin you can do with your mouth, but the other salmon that you need to grind, you can grind because it's something you would do in your kitchen. But from layayim shaman, you can mix the wine and oil together. Also, it's food.
For marinade.
But you can't grind the knife to sharpen it.
Shkoyach.
That's an interesting question.